We're doing the familiarity one.
Yep, that's right.
All right. Okay. Welcome to the Christian Principles Podcast. I'm Matt George.
And I'm Mark Zockel.
Well, today we're getting into a interesting topic of the world of teacher-student familiarity,
hmm
specifically the use of teacher titles.
We're gonna talk about teacher titles. We're gonna talk about a whole bunch of stuff. Because this topic itself is going to divide people really. And as we prepared for it, man, I was going everywhere in my mind. I had good friends on either side of the divide talking about it. So of course I went to you know, the 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 seat of all knowledge today, where we go for all of it. If you go to YouTube and you
That's
just
right.
type in, teacher, uh, calling teacher by their first name, there's some kind of TikTok challenge out there. Now I'm not on TikTok. That is not a platform. Are you on TikTok? I don't think
I
you are either. Yeah,
I the only TikTok I pay attention to is the clock. That's it.
exactly. Like these kids, crazy kids out here on the TikToks and the my faces and their Facebooks and whatnot. But anyway, if you go on YouTube, there's a TikTok challenge out there. Call your teacher by their first name. And I feel like the responses those students got when they called their teachers by the first name, those are the same exact responses as came from you and I when we talked about this,
Yeah.
and came from peers of mine, because the teacher responses, they were actually all over the board.
Yeah.
Pretty crazy. So,
I mean, when I think about it, of course, this is an important topic because we've got the relationship between a teacher and a student, or even more so, administrators or principals and students, is typically one that we want there to be a boundary. We want there to be a level of obviously respect, and how can you communicate that on a when you're extremely familiar just on the title,
exactly.
right?
Now, we'll start this conversation with actually feedback from one of our peers. Remember, on our podcast, we really want to hear from you. We would love
Yeah.
to hear your feedback as educators, as Christian school educators. And this friend of mine was not a Christian school educator, but he has been listening, and so we want to include him in this too. So he said, my students called me Bouch Dog, Bouch Daddy, and Boucher, just his last name. All were acceptable, and man, did that build bridges with all kids.
Mm-hmm.
Demanding titles kills relatability and makes sure you'll never be a favorite teacher. Just my 2 cents, though.
Mm.
Now, you know, I'm going to be on the other side of the divide on this one. I'm
Yeah.
absolutely going to say that I I'll use my mother.
Sure.
Were my mother to hear me call Mr. Ron Rice, Ron, even at this point, my former administrator, who we go to church together now and whatnot, but if she heard me call him Ron, I might get a back of the head slap. I still might get one right to the back of the head. And the same with Mrs. West, the
Mm-hmm.
same with Miss Ellen Purdue. I could go down, all those teachers that I had. And
Yeah.
even now, where it technically would be more collegial because we're adults.
Yeah.
I, so I would feel as though on the other side of the divide. I'll also point out that friend of mine, it was a public school setting, and of course, we're talking to Christian school principals here. We are dealing in a more private school setting. So
Mm.
what do you think, Matt? Where are you at on
Yeah,
that
I
great
would very,
range?
very similar to you, Mark, in that it's interesting because I feel like the difficulty in this topic all comes down to, in some ways, the personality of the individual, because there were even teachers in my life that referring to them by their full last name with preceded by Mr. or Mrs. They just didn't like it. And they asked for us to use another name, with the, whether it's just with the last initial or abbreviated name. But I never experienced not sharing, not including that Mr. or Mrs., before it. And yeah, there are certain individuals that, after becoming, reaching adulthood, as we do,
We made it.
we
Took a while.
some
Sometimes
might
I
some
still
might
wonder.
question, but yeah.
Sometimes I
Great
look at myself
great
and say,
quote.
I'm the adult. I'm the adult in the room now. How did
Let me
I
say
get
this.
here?
There's the great Jameson Coppola once said,
The great.
that at what point do we realize that, being an adult just means you're getting really good at pretending to be an adult, because that's really all we do.
That's all
But
it is.
even when we reach that point where, somebody that we've looked up to, a teacher, or a administrator, or somebody, is now a peer, and they say, "Oh, please, refer to me by first name." There are just those individuals who are like, "Listen, I can't go there,"
Not
because
going to happen.
and a lot of it, for me personally, I think goes to just amount of admiration and respect I have for that person. You mentioned Mr. Rice. I didn't grow up with Mr. Rice, so I will call him Ron on occasion, because I love having conversations with him. But at the same time, I will never refer to him as Ron in front of students. That just because I want that same admiration and respect from them, as I would have given had I grown up in the school as well.
And this we said from the start we're thinking about titles because that's where this conversation started between
Yeah.
us was I have experience in a school that there was a subset of teachers that expected to have students call them by their first name, not in no part their title, in no part their
Hmm.
earned title, in no part their last name. They expected, Johnny is a senior, Johnny is an eighth grader, and Johnny called that teacher. Let's just say John was talking to another John. John was saying, John, what's the answer on this test? So if we think of and it was a Christian school, and we think of a range of possibilities, there's the ranges.
Yeah.
We have the traditional your last name preceded by a title.
Yeah.
And then the other side, I suppose, is not quite as good as Bouch Daddy, as
Well,
Ken brought up, but
yeah. Well, then, as we think about Bouch Daddy for a second, the challenge of, and I think he brought it up in his comment, was, the stiffness, the rigidness of demanding students referring to you as Mr. or Mrs., could potentially build a wall, could potentially, not make you as approachable. But if we stop and consider that, just that, for a second, it makes me even think of, in a sports setting, if a student doesn't want to use the proper technique because it just doesn't feel good, that doesn't mean you abandon it or you don't try to stretch yourself, because once you perfect that technique, then you can actually go further. So that may be an extreme example, but I can understand where there is that immediate distancing, because of the formality. But I think that loses sight of the end game, of where we're trying to go.
it also takes into account, as I mentioned earlier, the different setting, I would say, and that has a lot to do with it. We we say that we are a Christian school. A Christian school is in partnership with the home, and we don't need to have the further discussion tonight about public school peers, perhaps. And again, not all, don't want to paint with a broad brushstroke, but it doesn't take too long looking up news articles, simple accounts from peers about times when even hiding things from parents about student individuality
Mm.
occurs. And by mission, that's not where our schools are. Our schools are in partnership with the home. We believe that God gave headship of the family to the parents and that
Mm-hmm.
they lend their authority to us throughout the day to help serve his purpose as in critical alignment with the church. So even, those three, of course, is what we're looking at. And so, as we've said before, we are in a service industry. There are going to absolutely be those that we are working with, those who we are partnering with as parents, who perhaps the Christian school situation, maybe we could say more generally, most private schools. I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth, but there's going to be an expectation by those paying the tuition bills that there would be a level of formality that perhaps is different
Yep.
than sister institutions elsewhere. But that being said, I'd also point out that in a bit of research, if you were to Google right now, um, teacher first name usage, some of the editorials that would be received back are editorials from some pretty new agey private schools, some Waters Crest Academy and whatnot. We could
Mm-hmm.
think of these institutions that they are going to attempt to build, and you said it earlier, those relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've talked a lot, but I mean, go
Yeah.
ahead. But
Well, I'm just saying that we'd see kind of the opposite of even what we would expect in Christian settings. I'm sure that we even have some parents that want that less formal approach because they expect less perhaps in their home, or they want their students engaging at a more meaningful level. I don't know. I'm just kind of spitballing that, but I can see where we're going to get it from both sides. But ultimately, what we have to come down to is what are we trying to accomplish as a school, which again is going to go to what's the mission? What are we trying to see in our students' lives, in our programs, that obviously parents are coming to us for? I mean, that's always been even something I've been at points just scratching my head about, if parents want their kids in our school and yet don't want the level of academic rigor, or in this case the more disciplined approach to life and respectful. If they don't want that, then why are they sending their kids to our school? So we're going to have to assume, as you were saying, they want that higher level of respect given to the teachers.
yeah, and we know that McDonald's has uniforms. That the classic example. We know that organizational structure is going to exist whether or not XYZ Christian school exists. At some level,
Yeah.
uh, we're signing up for something and we're expecting, which is another good. I raise the banner for codification again, even if that's not a term. Raise the banner for making sure it's written down in a handbook. Is it expressed to your student body how they are supposed to address a teacher?
Yeah.
Is it actually written down? Would discipline, which could occur from a first name call out from if that TikTok challenge went through the
Yeah.
school and they called out that teacher, would we be able to trace back to a a a black and white textual? We do expect it. We expect that there will be a formal Mr., Mrs., Miss, Doctor, whatever else that happens to
Yeah.
be.
And I think,
Madam,
yeah.
sir.
So writing it down is important, but then also leading by example. And when you're speaking with your students, when you reference another teacher in the building, or leader in the building, that you're also using that name, because that also can be really tricky for us as peers, to just constantly be referring to each other in first name basis, and we share that with students, then students are going to continue using that. But um, I think in our schools, in our settings, especially the smaller Christian schools, perhaps in a larger Christian school, this wouldn't be as helpful. But I was mentioning that there may be some teachers that are like, please don't call me, Mr. Smith, because Mr. Smith is my father. Like, and I just, I don't want to be referred to as that. But we need to sit down as leaders and come up with the appropriate title that they ought to be referred to, Mr. S, or, Miss whatever, the Mr. John, whatever the school can agree on, still shows that level of respect, and we can get behind that. And then when introducing faculty, at the beginning of the year, or again referencing them, you're consistently using that title throughout your organization, so that students also know that's the example I'm to follow.
Do you have an example of that at your school right now?
Well, we have several, because we have we've had in our recent past several teachers with the same last name. So to refer to a a Mrs. Taylor when there were three of them in the building, or Mrs. Zockel, who are you talking about? So there were distinguishing factors. Some preferred to get the moniker of Miss or Mrs. followed by their first name. And then I think probably the most interesting one is our mutual brother-in-law,
Mm-hmm.
who grew up
We
in
share
our
him.
school,
Mm-hmm.
and his father was the teacher. His father was Mr. Yoakum,
Mm-hmm.
and is still known as Mr. Yoakum as he frequents the ministry. And so for him to come in as Mr. Yoakum was not going to fly.
Didn't fit.
No, he's not a Mr. Yoakum whatsoever, except it is his name. But he,
Only by name is he.
but he lives and breathes soccer, and he wants to coach. So he wanted to be referred to as Coach Yoakum, and as typically does, it
Yeah.
naturally led into a wonderful kind of nickname of Coachum, that has become just an endearing term for him. So that is something that the school has agreed upon, that he has agreed upon, that for students to refer to him as Coachum is still showing him that level of respect and not bring him down to their level.
Which I think that's again going back to the relationships, which I'm sure our listeners would agree with us. That that willingness of Christopher to allow for his Padawans to
Mm,
call him not Mr. Yoakum, not even the Coach Yoakum, but Coach him, evidences an understanding of what the institution wants. He
mm,
knows that the institution he serves at is not going to get on board with 11th graders calling him Christopher. And his
right.
mother would not get on board with him calling him Chris either.
Right. Yeah.
So what has sprung up? You said endearing. What a wonderful term. Exactly. This has been a theoretically though, or I guess hypercritically, the Coachum meets but doesn't meet what the school is it would expect because it's not technically title and then last name, but it does. But you said been agreed upon,
Right.
and I think I actually remember sort of part of that conversation occurring, and just there was a general assent. So again, we go back and say there's strength in talking about the minutia. There
Yeah.
is we
Yeah.
lay it out clearly, and we are comfortable with it, and then you write it down, and we're good to
Yep.
go.
I mean, my wife is another example because she also was a volleyball coach. And a lot of her students call her Mrs. George just because she also taught for a while.
Hmm.
But her volleyball players would want to refer to her as coach, but Coach George, I mean, my wife is very proud of her last name, that I gave to her. However, Coach George, doesn't really feel right. Even I don't like referring to her as Coach George. So she is Coach Jenny because that's it's more specific, I guess, to her, but she like Christopher, um, still see that as a title of, I'm under you, because coach is somebody you look up to. When we spoke about coaches and the importance of coaches, and so maybe there's a slightly different level there, but I think that's still a good, if it's even a middle ground, maybe that's a good middle ground.
We also have our younger students, especially I think of the pre-K. Whenever I write Christmas cards to the faculty, and I think of, okay, does she want me to write down MISS,
Yeah,
uh, uh, Evelyn, or should I be writing MRS? But she teaches pre-K K5, so I only ever hear them say Miss so and so,
yeah,
Miss first name, and then we have there is the tradition at Faith Baptist School, and I'm sure in many of our institutions, there's the teacher's name on the outside of their door. And
yeah.
so what are we writing on the outside of the door? Are we writing that moniker the students give
Know
the
them
teacher
by.
because, yeah, will they recognize their classroom if they go outside that classroom, they don't see that teacher's name as Miss Evelyn when technically be Mrs. Taylor,
Yeah,
or
yeah,
even that discussion is worth having. But let's get on the other side just to say we're on the other side.
sure.
Let's stretch the other side and be critical of both and say, or not critical of both, but offer assent to both. I do find, I guess I put it this way: if we go to the Bible,
Hmm.
does the Bible demand monikers?
Hmm.
Where would what kind of argument would we have to make from Scripture to demand monikers? And I suppose, help me out here, but I suppose it would have to come down to principles of respect, understood cultural norms, Christians making sure they are well above board.
Yeah.
But I'm but black and white obedience, disobedience to a principle, it I have a hard time saying that the first name's impossible to use. So,
I guess on that point, this popped into my head, but the best example you'd have of that is the disciples referring to Jesus as rabbi,
teacher, there you go.
because he was, he, while his name was definitely Jesus, they referred to him as rabbi, as Hebrew students would refer to their teachers,
Hmm.
because I'm placing myself under your tutelage, and so you are dear to me in this way, and so that's how I'm referring to you, because I want you to teach me. I want, and I guess that's perhaps even back in history. I think this is really a neat point, that early universities and colleges, as they were started, you know students were just going to wherever the um the teachers were, because I want to learn from that person, like specifically I want to
Hmm.
go learn from them. And so you're going to perhaps have a bit more of that natural respect, whereas our students are, not necessarily getting to choose their schools and choose their teachers. But
Sure.
that's the idea, that we want to create a a feeling of gratitude, that you are taking this time to invest in me, and I want to learn from you. And so it's this natural, um
There's there's a humility in that, I think.
humility. That's the
And,
word. Yeah.
and maybe that's going to get as close to a strong argument one way or the other. There's a humility in the teacher not having to demand the title, as Kent said, not having to demand the title for the respect of it, and appreciating the relationships which were more congenial because he could find respect other ways. But we also do very much want to instill in our students that there is a humble acceptance of God ordained authority
Yeah.
necessary for their we talk about living our best life nowadays, right? Living
Right.
my best
Right.
life is going to be, well, that's living your best life is
Yeah.
in the humble acceptance of the role which the authorities in your life at that point for our students, their parents, has placed them under.
Hmm.
And in this way, demanding that they comply with that is a step towards showing them the necessity of it, showing them where obedience is useful in this way. So,
Yeah, not to bust open another can of worms, but there are also those teachers out there that refer to all their students as also Mr. and Miss,
oh,
followed by their
absolutely.
last name rather than first name basis, which uh, I think tacks
That's just a
into
memory tactic, though. That's because sometimes I can't
sometimes,
remember the
sometimes,
teacher.
but I've also seen it done very purposefully
Sure,
to
sure.
communicate that mutual respect, or even as we've just kind of hit on, that mutual humility. Like it, I'm not arrogant to demand this of my students, because I've earned to be the right to be called Mr. George. Like, no, that's not the point of it. I want to prepare them, and just as Jesus wished to create within his disciples a servant leadership, a servant's heart, that we want to instill that in our students as well. So showing them respect, I think in turn is going to create within them a spirit to also want to return that respect.
This has been good. This has been a lot of fun, actually. But let's go ahead and pause here for a moment
Yeah.
and hear from our sponsor.
Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
All right, you want to throw it to
Yep,
me from
I
the
got it.
script for the is there anything legal, ethical, spiritual we want to talk about?
I don't think so. I think we've hit it all.
We hit a lot. Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead and send it to me for Beth.
Well, we've had a great discussion on student familiarity, but it is time for our Christian school administrator uh, spotlight. So today, for our episode, we are recognizing Beth Bogger, the assistant principal at Chestertown Christian Academy.
Assistant Principal Bogger. Congratulations. You're 2 years into the role. Beth, as we know her, came into the. I want to start that over, Matthew. Congratulations, Beth, 2 years into the role. Beth, as she came into my life and the life of the schools at which I was employed, came into our lives as the athletic director
Mm-hmm.
of Chestertown, which we referred to as Cheatertown back in the day. Claim that
Wow.
one. We'll have a
Wow.
conversation about that later, but it was what it was. Now it's more just Cheesertown or something. But anyway, it's okay. There's respect there. She came in as the AD there, but she also, more impressively, was the or as impressively, was the vice president of the Delaware Valley Christian Athletic Conference under Jerry from Fairwinds Christian in Bear, Delaware. Now I say that in a prodding, funny way because we all love Jerry, but we know who really ran the DVCAC was Beth, and she had a great way about her. It was enjoyable to sit in those meetings and to hear from the two of them, some good yin and yang going on with the two of them. So I knew her in that role and it really came to appreciate and see her drive and truly her love for Christian education and for the students. And since that time, she pursued a higher degree through Bob Jones University, received that higher, I believe at this point has received that higher degree or is on her way to being close to it done. And with some shifting sands in the administration, she and Principal Lynn, as she has come into, they both came into these roles in the last couple of years. They have made a wonderful team there at Chestertown. Again, we say congratulations on making it through your
Yeah.
accreditation this last year. Well done. I know that just puts you on track to keep pursuing excellence as you are. But thank you for your role in your administration, your teaching, your coaching, and for a long time now, whether or not you realize it, Beth, there was a lot of people that you had a part in their athletic existence, which for some of these students, as we well know, that makes up 99% of why they even go to school in the first place
Mm-hmm.
in their minds
Yeah.
anyway. So Beth, thank you so much
Yep.
for being that. We appreciate you.
Thank you, Beth. And thank you for joining us on the Christian Principles Podcast. Remember, spread the word about our podcast to your fellow administrators.
Yes, we would love to hear from you. We would love to hear from those fellow administrators. And hey, it's probably time to start asking for some more subscribers, get us to our goals. But until then, thanks for growing with us today.
Cool.